The handcuffs bit into Marcus Bennett's wrists with enough force to numb his fingers. Blood traced a warm line from his temple down to his jaw, copper taste flooding his mouth where his lip had split against the armrest. The aisle of Flight 447 stretched ahead like a gauntlet, every face a witness, every phone a camera pointed at his humiliation. Security Officer Silas Brennan's grip on his arm felt designed to hurt, not restrain. The fabric of Marcus's shirt tore as he stumbled forward, knees scraping the industrial carpet, pain radiating up both legs. This is Marcus Bennett. 6 hours ago, nobody knew his name. Rewind. The alarm cut through the Brooklyn apartment at 4:47 a.m., 3 minutes before Marcus would have woken naturally. He silenced it with a practiced tap, no grogginess, just the immediate shift from sleep to purpose that came from 20 years of building something from nothing. The bedroom walls held no artwork, no photographs, nothing that screamed wealth or achievement. A single window overlooked a street where delivery trucks were already grinding through their routes, the city's infrastructure waking before its people. Marcus pulled on a sweater that had cost $1,800 but looked like it came from a clearance rack. Brunello Cucinelli, cashmere so fine it felt like air, the kind of luxury that whispered instead of shouted. The worn jeans were similar. Japanese selvage denim that appeared ordinary until someone with trained eyes noticed the construction. His sneakers showed genuine wear, not the manufactured distress fashion brands sold to people who'd never walked anywhere that mattered. The leather bag waiting by the door had scuffs along its edges, marks from a decade of travel, of boardrooms in 12 countries, of deals that shifted industries. The kitchen counter held a single espresso cup, the machine already purring through its routine. Marcus drank standing, looking at nothing in particular, his mind already in Geneva where a $250 million acquisition waited. Medical technology, the kind that would put diagnostic tools in rural clinics across 3 continents, the kind that saved lives in places where healthcare meant a 6-hour walk to the nearest road. The meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. Central European Time. His flight left JFK at 7:30. He almost took a car service. The app was open on his phone, the button ready. But Marcus had learned long ago that the best intelligence came from staying close to the ground, from seeing how systems worked when nobody thought the boss was watching. He closed the app and called for an Uber instead. The driver didn't speak much, which suited Marcus fine. They merged onto the expressway as the sun started its slow climb, turning the city's glass towers into vertical rivers of gold. Traffic moved with surprising ease for a Thursday morning. Marcus watched the bridges pass, the infrastructure that kept 8 million people connected, fed, moving. He'd grown up in this city when it was rougher, meaner before the renovation wave that pushed working families to the edges. His mother had worked 3 jobs to keep him in a school district that mattered. She died before seeing him graduate college, before the first company, before any of it meant something. The memory surfaced without invitation. Marcus at 12, sitting in the back of a police cruiser, watching his father pressed against the hood of their car. The officer's knee in his father's back, the way his father's voice stayed calm even as the metal bit into his cheek. Even as passers-by stared with that particular blend of curiosity and judgment reserved for black men in handcuffs. His father's voice later that night after the charges were dropped, after the apologies that weren't really apologies. Stay calm, Marcus. Always stay calm. Document everything. Let them show you who they are, then decide who you're going to be. Marcus had decided to be the person who owned the system instead of being crushed by it. 23 years old when he'd launched his first airline route optimization software. 28 when Skybridge Airways emerged from his second company, built on algorithms that could predict passenger flow better than any human analyst. 35 when the IPO made him wealthy enough that wealth became irrelevant. 42 now, sitting in the back of a stranger's car, heading to an airport he owned but where nobody would recognize him. Terminal 4 rose ahead, its glass facade reflecting morning light. Marcus thanked the driver, grabbed his bag, and stepped into the flow of travelers. Families with too much luggage. Business types already on their phones, voices sharp with urgency. A young couple holding hands. That particular terror and excitement of people who didn't fly often. Marcus moved through them like water, invisible in his ordinariness. The first checkpoint came at the Skybridge check-in counter. Marcus had booked under his own name. No special codes, no VIP flags in the system. He wanted to see what a passenger named Marcus Bennett experienced when that passenger looked like him, dressed like him, carried themselves like him. The agent was young, maybe 24, her uniform crisp enough to suggest recent hire. Her name tag read Jennifer. She took his ID and boarding pass with a smile that reached her eyes. Genuine warmth in her greeting. Marcus felt himself relax slightly. Maybe today would be different. Maybe the training programs he'd mandated were working, the unconscious bias workshops, the accountability metrics. Jennifer's fingers moved across her keyboard, then stopped. Her eyes flicked from the screen to Marcus's face, then back to the screen. The smile didn't disappear, but it changed texture, became something more professional and less warm. "Mr. Bennett, I just need to verify some information." Her voice remained pleasant, but something underneath had shifted like ice forming on a pond's surface. Marcus kept his own voice level. "Of course. What do you need?" "This booking, it's first class to Geneva, round trip. I'm just confirming you made this reservation yourself?" The question landed with odd weight. Marcus had flown this route dozens of times, never been asked to confirm his own booking before. "Yes, I made it myself 3 months ago." Jennifer nodded, but her fingers kept moving, pulling up screens that Marcus couldn't see. "And you'll be paying with the card on file? The American Express?" "That's correct." Marcus watched her face, cataloging the micro-expressions. Something in the system had triggered doubt, maybe the mismatch between his appearance and the ticket price. Maybe just the algorithm of assumption that ran in every human brain, the one that said people who looked like him belonged in certain spaces and not others. "I'm going to need to see that card, please, and a second form of ID." Marcus produced both. His passport, the card that had a credit limit he'd never tested because there was nothing he wanted that he couldn't simply buy. Jennifer studied them with more intensity than necessary, holding the passport up to the light as if checking for forgery. Behind Marcus, the line was building. A man in a business suit sighed audibly, the kind of performative impatience designed to pressure service workers. Jennifer glanced at him, then back to Marcus, and something in her posture shifted. She was no longer helping a customer. She was solving a problem that was taking too long. "Just one moment." She picked up a phone, turned slightly away, her voice dropping to a murmur Marcus couldn't parse. 30 seconds. A minute. The man behind Marcus sighed again, louder this time. A supervisor appeared. A woman in her 40s with the tired eyes of someone who'd worked every position in the terminal before earning her title. Her name tag read, Sandra, Shift Supervisor. She took Marcus's documents, glanced at the screen Jennifer had been studying, and something in her face hardened into certainty. "Mr. Bennett, this is a significant purchase. We need to verify the card hasn't been compromised. It's standard procedure for high-value transactions." Sandra's voice had the rehearsed quality of someone delivering a script they didn't quite believe. Marcus knew the statistics, knew that black passengers were 3 times more likely to face additional screening, twice as likely to be asked for extra documentation, 5 times more likely to have their payment methods questioned. He'd commissioned the study himself, buried in the third quarter operational report that most board members never read past page 12. "I understand." Marcus kept his hands visible, his posture open, non-threatening. Every movement calculated to de-escalate. "What do you need from me?" Sandra made a show of calling the credit card company, speaking in codes and reference numbers while Marcus stood in the fluorescent light, feeling the eyes of other passengers on him. Some curious, some annoyed at the delay. A few sympathetic but not sympathetic enough to say anything. 5 minutes became 8. The line behind him diverted to other counters. Jennifer had already moved on to the next customer, her crisis resolved by passing it upward. Sandra finally hung up the phone, handed back his documents with a smile that didn't acknowledge the absurdity of what had just happened. "Everything checks out. You're all set, Mr. Bennett. Gate 47. Boarding starts in 40 minutes. No apology. No recognition that she'd just stolen 10 minutes of his life based on an assumption she'd never make about the businessman who'd sighed behind him, the one who'd been waved through while Marcus waited. Marcus took his documents and moved toward security. The TSA checkpoint loomed ahead, its own theater of safety, its own opportunity for dignity to be measured and found wanting. He joined the line, removed his laptop, his belt, his shoes. The officer checking IDs barely looked at him, just waved him through. The metal detector stayed silent as Marcus passed. He thought for a moment he'd cleared it, that whatever quota of humiliation the universe demanded had been met at check-in. Then the scanner flagged his bag. The TSA agent who pulled it aside was methodical, almost bored. He opened every compartment, removed every item, laying them on the steel table like evidence. Marcus's toiletries, his charging cables, the 3 protein bars he'd packed for the flight, a book he'd been meaning to read for 6 months. The agent's hands moved with practiced efficiency, squeezing, probing, testing. "This your bag, sir?" "Yes." "You pack it yourself?" "Yes." "Anyone have access to it before you arrived?" "No." The questions were standard, the routine identical for every bag that got pulled aside. But the agent's eyes kept drifting back to Marcus, measuring something, calculating something. The bag held nothing unusual. The scan must have caught a weird angle on the laptop, or the protein bars looked dense enough to trigger caution. It happened, but it was happening to him, again. The agent called over a supervisor, a second inspection, more thorough this time. They swabbed the bag for explosive residue, ran the material through their analyzer. Marcus stood with his hands at his sides, watching other passengers flow past, their bags unquestioned, their mornings uninterrupted. A white woman in yoga pants pulling a bag twice the size of his, a college kid with a backpack plastered in stickers, an elderly man who needed help lifting his carry-on. All of them waved through while Marcus waited. The test came back clean. Of course it came back clean. The supervisor nodded to the first agent, who began repacking Marcus's belongings with less care than he'd used to remove them. The protein bars got shoved in sideways, crushing against the book. The charging cables tangled into a knot. "You're all set. Sorry for the inconvenience." Marcus repacked properly, taking his time, refusing to be rushed by the impatience he could feel radiating from the agents. When he finally walked away, 23 minutes had passed since he'd entered security. He checked his watch. Boarding would start in 17 minutes. The walk to gate 47 took another 8. Marcus arrived to find the area already crowded, passengers clustering near the desk where agents were setting up for the boarding process. He found a seat near the windows, far enough from the crowd to think, close enough to hear the announcements. His phone buzzed. 3 emails from his COO, flagging decisions that couldn't wait. A text from his legal team about the Geneva acquisition, last-minute details about escrow and transfer schedules. Marcus answered them efficiently, fingers moving across the glass with the speed of someone who'd built his fortune on managing information flow. He almost missed the first boarding call. "Skybridge Flight 447 to Geneva is now boarding our first class and premium passengers. We welcome Diamond and Platinum members to board at this time." Marcus stood, grabbed his bag, and joined the small queue at the priority lane. 3 people ahead of him, a couple in their 60s, dressed in the casual luxury of people who flew first class as routine. Behind them, a woman in her late 30s, designer everything, the kind of outfit that cost more than most people's monthly rent but was selected to look effortless. The gate agent scanning passes was Diane Merrick, according to her name tag. 48, if Marcus had to guess, with the posture of someone who'd spent 20-plus years in the industry. Her smile for the elderly couple was warm, practiced. She commented on their diamond status, welcomed them aboard with genuine-sounding enthusiasm. The woman ahead of Marcus got similar treatment, a brief moment of recognition, a comment about how lovely Geneva was this time of year. Then it was Marcus's turn. He handed over his boarding pass and ID. Diane took them, scanned the pass, and her expression shifted in that now familiar way. The smile stayed in place, but the warmth drained from it like water from a cracked glass. "Mr. Bennett, let me just verify this." Her voice carried that same professional courtesy as the check-in agent, as the TSA supervisor, the tone that meant she was doing him a favor by not outright questioning his legitimacy. "There's a problem?" Marcus kept his voice neutral, curious, not defensive. No problem, just confirming. You're in seat 1A, first class, is that correct?" Marcus had been asked to confirm his name, his address, his credit card, his bag, his identity twice already this morning. Now his seat assignment needed verification. "That's correct." Diane studied her screen with an intensity that suggested she was reading a novel, not a simple seat assignment. Her fingers moved across the keyboard, pulling up information Marcus couldn't see behind him. The line was building again. He could feel the impatience gathering like storm pressure. "When did you book this ticket, Mr. Bennett?" 3 months ago. "Is there an issue with the reservation?" "No, it's just..." Diane glanced up at him, her eyes doing that quick assessment people thought was subtle but never was, taking in his sweater, his jeans, his worn sneakers, calculating whether the person in front of her matched the price point of the ticket he held. "We sometimes have issues with upgrades that don't process correctly. I want to make sure you're in the right seat." "I purchased the ticket at full price, no upgrade." Diane nodded slowly, her doubt visible in the set of her mouth. "Let me just call down to the aircraft and confirm there hasn't been a double booking situation. We've had some system glitches lately." She picked up the phone. Marcus stood in the priority lane, his boarding pass still in her hand, while she spoke in low tones to someone on the plane. The couple who'd boarded ahead of him were already down the jetway, probably settling into their seats. The woman with the designer outfit was likely pouring herself champagne. Marcus was still at the gate, being verified. "Okay, thank you." Diane hung up, looked at Marcus with an expression that might have been embarrassment or might have been annoyance at having her suspicions proved wrong. "You're all set. Sorry for the delay. Equipment issues." She handed back his documents, but her hand hovered for a moment as if she might snatch them back at the last second if he reached for them wrong. Marcus took them and walked down the jetway. The bridge smelled like recycled air and jet fuel, that particular airport scent that was the same in every city. His footsteps echoed against the metal floor. Ahead, the aircraft door stood open, flight attendants visible in their crisp uniforms preparing for the departure dance they performed dozens of times a week. He stepped aboard. The flight attendant at the door greeted him with a smile that flickered when she took in his appearance. Marcus had learned to read these micro-expressions, the subtle recalibrations that happened in the first 3 seconds of an encounter. She'd been expecting someone different in first class, someone who looked like they belonged. "Welcome aboard, sir. May I help you find your seat?" "I'm fine, thank you. 1A." Marcus moved forward into the first-class cabin. 8 seats in a 1-2-1 configuration, leather that probably cost more per square foot than most people's cars. Soft lighting designed to soothe, not illuminate. The smell of expensive coffee already brewing in the galley. Seat 1A was on the left, window seat, the most coveted real estate on the aircraft. Marcus lifted his bag toward the overhead bin. "Excuse me, but you're in my seat." The voice came from behind him, sharp with confidence, carrying the assumption of immediate compliance. Marcus turned to find a woman in her late 30s. Blonde hair pulled back so tight it looked architectural. Ivory blazer that probably cost what most people made in a month. Her eyes were ice blue, her mouth set in a line that suggested she'd never been told no in her life and wouldn't start accepting it today. Marcus kept his bag in his hands. "I'm sorry." "That's my seat, 1A. I always sit in 1A. She gestured with one manicured hand, diamonds catching the cabin light. "There's been some mistake." Marcus pulled out his boarding pass, held it up so she could see. "This is my assigned seat. There's no mistake." The woman stepped closer, invading the already tight space of the aisle. Her perfume was aggressive, expensive, designed to announce arrival. She barely glanced at his boarding pass before dismissing it. "No, I don't think you understand. I'm Vanessa Hartwell. I've been flying Skybridge for 20 years. I'm a Diamond member. I always sit in 1A on this route. Always." Her voice had risen slightly, enough that the few other passengers already seated were glancing over, curiosity replacing their pre-flight rituals. Marcus held his ground, bag still in hand. "I have a confirmed reservation for this seat. If there's been a double booking, the gate agent can help resolve it." Vanessa's eyes narrowed. She looked him over with the kind of obvious assessment that crossed from rudeness into hostility. The worn sweater, the old bag, the absence of any visible markers of the wealth required to sit in first class. Marcus watched her build her narrative in real time, saw the story taking shape behind those cold eyes. This man didn't belong here. This man had gotten into this seat through some error, some system glitch, some mistake that needed correcting. "You need to move." Vanessa's voice had hardened into command, not a request, a directive from someone used to being obeyed. The flight attendant from the door appeared, drawn by the rising tension. Monica Reeves, according to her name tag, maybe 44, with the calm face of someone who'd navigated countless passenger disputes and knew all the de-escalation scripts. "Is everything all right here?" Monica's voice was professionally pleasant, trained neutrality that gave no indication whose side she might take. Vanessa turned to her with visible relief, the arrival of authority who would surely fix this obvious error. "There's been a mistake with the seating. This is my seat. I always sit in 1A. This gentleman seems to be confused." Monica looked at Marcus, her expression carefully blank. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass?" Marcus handed it over. Monica studied it with the same intensity as the gate agent, as if the simple seat assignment contained hidden codes that needed deciphering. Her eyes flicked between the pass and Marcus's face, making calculations Marcus had seen 1,000 times before. "Mr. Bennett, this does show you're assigned to 1A. Monica's voice carried a slight question mark, as if the printed confirmation on official airline stationery might still be subject to doubt. "That's correct." Vanessa made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a scoff. "That's ridiculous. Show me." She reached for the boarding pass in Monica's hand. Monica hesitated, caught between competing demands. She handed the pass to Vanessa, who studied it with obvious skepticism, as if she might find it was printed on cheap copy paper, a forgery created in some back alley. "This doesn't make sense." Vanessa looked up at Monica, ignoring Marcus entirely. "I booked this seat 3 months ago. I have confirmation emails. I've flown this exact route 47 times in the last 5 years. Every single time I'm in 1A. It's noted in my profile." Monica took the boarding pass back, returned it to Marcus. "Ms. Hartwell, I understand your preference, but Mr. Bennett does have a confirmed reservation for this seat. Your assignment today is 4B, which is also a fully lie-flat seat in business class with—" "I don't do 4B." Vanessa cut her off, voice rising another notch. Other passengers were definitely watching now, some with sympathy for Vanessa, some with irritation at the delay, a few with growing discomfort at where this confrontation seemed headed. "I do 1A. That's what I paid for. That's what I expect." Monica glanced at Marcus and something in her expression shifted. A decision being made, calculations running behind professional courtesy. Sir, we do have an excellent seat available in 4B. It's still business class, fully lie flat, and we'd be happy to— No. Marcus's voice stayed level, but steel had entered it. I paid for this seat. I'm sitting in this seat. Vanessa's face flushed, red creeping up her neck. Look at you. The words came out sharp, designed to cut. That jacket, those shoes, that bag. You really expect people to believe you paid full price for first class? The cabin went very quiet. Someone's phone screen dimmed. The sound of the auxiliary power unit suddenly seemed louder, filling the space where conversation had died. Monica's professional mask slipped for just a moment, shock registering before she caught herself. But she didn't step in, didn't shut down the escalation, just stood there, caught between protocol and something uglier. Marcus felt it then, the familiar tightening in his chest. The moment when a routine interaction crossed into territory he'd navigated his entire life. The space where assumptions became accusations, where his presence became a problem that needed solving. Ma'am, I paid full price for this ticket. I have every right to be here. Marcus kept his voice calm, each word precisely placed. Vanessa's laugh was cold, performative, designed for the watching audience. Of course you did. And I'm sure there's a perfectly logical explanation for how someone like you ended up in first class. She pulled a wallet from her designer bag, extracted $500 bills with the casual ease of someone for whom money was purely theoretical. She held them out toward Marcus, letting them hang in the air between them like an accusation. Here, take this. Go sit somewhere more comfortable, somewhere more appropriate. Everyone wins. The bills fluttered slightly in the recycled air. Marcus stared at them, at the casual cruelty of the gesture, the assumption that he could be bought, moved, relocated like a piece of misplaced cargo. Around them, the cabin held its breath. A businessman across the aisle had his phone out, pointed in their direction, not even pretending not to record. 2 rows back, a woman in pearls had her hand over her mouth. Another passenger was typing furiously on their phone, probably live tweeting the encounter. Marcus felt the weight of every similar moment in his life crystallize into this one. Every time he'd been followed in a store, every cab that hadn't stopped. Every meeting where someone assumed he was the assistant, not the executive. Every space where his presence required explanation, justification, proof. His father's voice echoed across 30 years. Stay calm, document everything, let them show you who they are, then decide who you're going to be. Marcus looked at the money, then at Vanessa's face, then at Monica, who stood frozen between them like a referee who'd lost control of the match. Put your money away. His voice was quiet, but it carried. I'm not moving, not. Vanessa's eyes widened, genuine shock breaking through her entitled fury. Nobody told her no, not about seats, not about anything. Excuse me? I said I'm not moving. This is my seat. I paid for it. I'm sitting in it. Marcus turned away from her, moved to lift his bag into the overhead compartment. Vanessa's hand shot out, grabbed his arm. Not hard, but the contact was enough. Crossing a line from verbal to physical, from confrontation to something more dangerous. Don't you dare turn your back on me. Her voice had gone shrill, control slipping. Do you know who I am? Do you have any idea what I can do to you? Monica finally stepped in, but not the way Marcus needed her to. Not to defend him, to de-escalate Vanessa, to acknowledge the absurdity and cruelty of what was happening. Instead, she gently touched Vanessa's arm, the gesture sympathetic, understanding. Ms. Hartwell, please let me handle this. Monica turned to Marcus, and her voice had cooled several degrees. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step into the galley area while we sort this out. Marcus stayed where he was. Sort what out? I have the correct seat. There's nothing to sort out. Sir, Monica's tone had shifted from neutral to warning. You're causing a disruption. If you don't comply, I'll have to call the captain. The absurdity of it hit Marcus like a physical blow. He was causing the disruption. Not Vanessa, who'd confronted him, insulted him, tried to bribe him, grabbed his arm. Him for having the audacity to sit in a seat he'd legally purchased. "Call the captain." Marcus heard himself say it, heard the line being crossed, but couldn't stop it, wouldn't stop it. Because if he backed down now, if he accepted the seat in 4B, if he took Vanessa's money and made himself small enough to fit into the space they wanted to put him in, he'd be complicit in his own erasure. Monica's face hardened. She reached for the phone in the galley, punched a code. 30 seconds later, the cockpit door opened and Captain Caldwell Thornton emerged. 58 years old, silver hair, the kind of posture that comes from military background and absolute certainty in one's own authority. He wore his captain's uniform like armor, every button precise, every crease sharp. His eyes swept the cabin, taking in Vanessa's fury, Monica's rigid stance, Marcus standing in the aisle with his bag still in his hand. "What's the problem here?" Thornton's voice carried the weight of someone used to being obeyed without question. Monica spoke before anyone else could. "Captain, this passenger is refusing to take an alternate seat. We have a seating dispute and he's being uncooperative." Thornton looked at Marcus, his gaze heavy with assessment and judgment. He didn't ask for the boarding pass, didn't request Marcus's side of the story, just looked at him and made his decision in the time it took to draw breath. "Sir, on my aircraft, I'm the law. My crew says you're a problem, that's all I need to know. You have 30 seconds to deplane voluntarily or I'll have security remove you." Marcus's grip on his bag tightened. "Captain, I have a confirmed reservation for seat 1A. I've done nothing wrong. I haven't raised my voice, haven't touched anyone, haven't violated any regulations. I'm simply trying to sit in the seat I paid for." Thornton's expression didn't change. "My crew has determined you're disruptive. That's sufficient grounds for removal under federal aviation regulations. Now, are you going to walk off or am I calling security?" Vanessa, still standing behind Marcus, made a small sound of satisfaction. Victory. Or at least the certainty that victory was seconds away. Marcus felt it all converging, every assumption, every indignity, every moment in his life when the rules had been applied differently because of the skin he wore. He thought about standing down, about taking 4B, about choosing the path of least resistance. He thought about his father's advice about staying calm. Then he thought about every passenger who'd come after him. Every person who'd faced Diane Merrick at the gate, Captain Thornton in the cabin, Vanessa Hartwell in their seat, every time the system had a choice between justice and convenience, and chose convenience because it was easier. "I'm not leaving." Marcus's voice stayed level, but something final had entered it. "You're discriminating against me. You're violating my civil rights, and I want to speak with your supervisor before any security is called." Thornton's face flushed. "I don't have a supervisor on this aircraft, son. I'm in command here. Security now, or I'll have you arrested for interfering with a flight crew." "I haven't interfered with anyone. I'm standing in the aisle of a plane that hasn't left the gate holding a valid ticket, being threatened with arrest for the crime of refusing to give up a seat I legally purchased." Marcus pulled out his phone. "I'd like to make a call before this escalates further." Thornton's hand shot out faster than Marcus expected, grabbing for the phone. "No calls. You're done talking. Monica, call security. I want him removed immediately." Marcus pulled the phone back, protective instinct overriding caution. "Don't touch me. I have the right to... You have the right to follow crew instructions or get off my plane." Thornton stepped closer, using his height and position to intimidate. "Last chance. Walk off now or be carried off." The jetway door opened and 2 security officers entered. Marcus recognized the type immediately. Former military, maybe former police, the kind who'd been taught that compliance was everything and resistance justified force. The lead officer was 35, built like someone who'd spent serious time in a gym, with the kind of eyes that had stopped seeing people as individuals somewhere along the way. His name tag read S. Brennan. "Captain?" Brennan's voice was neutral, professional, but his hand had already moved to the cuffs on his belt. "This passenger is refusing to deplane. He's been asked multiple times, warned about the consequences. Remove him." Brennan looked at Marcus, taking in the situation with practiced assessment. "Sir, I need you to come with me." Marcus's heart rate kicked up, adrenaline flooding his system. This was happening. Actually happening. "Officer, I'm a paying passenger with a valid ticket. I haven't broken any laws. I'm simply sitting in my assigned seat." "You're trespassing if the captain says you're trespassing." Brennan moved closer, his partner flanking to the right, creating a formation designed to control and intimidate. "You can walk voluntarily or we can assist you. Your choice." Marcus glanced past them to the faces watching. Phones out now, multiple cameras recording every moment. The businessman across the aisle had his laptop open, probably streaming live. This would be online in minutes, viral in hours. Every second of what came next would be documented, dissected, turned into content. "I'll leave voluntarily if you just let me make one phone call first." Marcus kept his hands visible, his voice calm, but his mind was racing through options, consequences, outcomes. "No calls." Brennan's hand closed around Marcus's upper arm, grip firm enough to hurt. "Hands behind your back, sir." "That's not necessary. I'm not resisting. I'm complying." Marcus felt the first edge of fear cutting through his anger. This was how it escalated, how reasonable encounters became tragedies. One wrong move, one misinterpreted gesture, and everything could go wrong in the space between heartbeats. "Hands behind your back." Brennan's voice had hardened and his grip tightened, fingers digging into muscle hard enough to leave bruises. Marcus complied, putting his hands behind him, feeling the degradation of the posture, the vulnerability. Brennan slapped the cuffs on with more force than required. Plastic bit into Marcus's wrists, cutting off circulation almost immediately. The ratchet sound echoed through the cabin as the cuffs locked tight. "These are too tight." Marcus's fingers were already going numb. "You need to loosen them." "They're fine." Brennan yanked Marcus's arm, pulling him off balance. Marcus stumbled, his shoulders screaming protest as the joint was forced past comfortable range of motion. What happened next took maybe 3 seconds, but would replay in slow motion across every major news network for the next 48 hours. Brennan pulled. Marcus's foot caught on the edge of Vanessa's designer carry-on bag, which she'd left partially blocking the aisle. He pitched forward, unable to catch himself with his hands restrained. His temple connected with the armrest of seat 2A with a crack that sounded worse than it felt in the moment. Pain exploded white and hot. Copper flooded his mouth where his teeth caught his lower lip. Marcus tasted blood, warm and metallic. Felt it running down the side of his face, hot against his skin. The cabin tilted for a moment, his vision blurring. "He's resisting!" Brennan shouted, loud enough for every camera to hear, establishing the narrative even as he wrenched Marcus back upright. Marcus's shirt tore, the fabric giving way under the rough handling. His knees hit the floor, industrial carpet abrading through his jeans. Brennan grabbed a fistful of his sweater and dragged him forward down the aisle, past the watching passengers who did nothing but film and gasp and murmur among themselves. Marcus tried to keep his feet under him, tried to maintain some dignity, but Brennan was moving too fast, pulling too hard. His knees scraped along the floor. The blood from his temple dripped onto his shoulder, onto the carpet, leaving a trail like breadcrumbs. Nobody intervened. Not Monica, not the captain, not any of the 150 passengers who watched a bleeding man being dragged through the aircraft they all shared. A few looked horrified. Most looked uncomfortable. Some looked satisfied, as if justice was being served, as if they'd witnessed a threat being neutralized. Vanessa Hartwell watched from seat 1A, her expression one of vindication, of order being restored. She'd reclaimed her territory. The disruption had been removed. The jetway felt endless. Brennan didn't slow down, didn't ease his grip, didn't acknowledge Marcus's quiet statement that he could walk if given the chance. Just kept pulling, kept moving, establishing dominance through force because that was what his training had taught him and his instincts demanded. They emerged into the gate area where other passengers waited for other flights. All of them turning to watch, phones coming out to capture this moment, this man being removed from a plane with blood on his face and handcuffs on his wrists. Becoming content, becoming a story, becoming reduced to a 30-second clip that would be shared and commented on and argued over by people who'd never know his name. Brennan pulled him into a security office, small and windowless, with a table bolted to the floor and chairs designed for discomfort. He pushed Marcus into one of the chairs, finally releasing his grip. "Don't move!" Brennan positioned himself by the door, hand still on his belt, ready to respond to any perceived threat. Marcus sat, wrists screaming behind his back, blood still trickling from his temple, and felt the full weight of what had just happened settle over him. Not the physical pain, though that was real enough. The systematic dismantling of his dignity in front of hundreds of witnesses. The casual efficiency with which the system had moved to put him in his place. His phone was still in his pocket, unreachable with his hands cuffed. But Brennan's phone buzzed. Then again, then a third time. The officer pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and his face went pale. "What the hell?" His voice had lost its confident edge. He looked at Marcus, then back at his phone, then at the door. The airport security channel was erupting. Marcus couldn't hear the specifics, but he could see the impact in Brennan's body language. Confusion, concern, the first edge of fear. Whatever was happening, it was bigger than one passenger removed from one flight. The ripples had started. Marcus's head throbbed. His wrists had gone from numb to burning. Blood had soaked through his collar, ruining the expensive sweater that looked cheap. But underneath the pain and indignity, something else was building. Not anger, though that was there, not even the desire for revenge, though he'd be lying if he said the thought didn't cross his mind. Certainty. Cold, clear, absolute certainty about what came next. They'd shown him who they were. Diane at the gate, Vanessa in the cabin, Monica and Captain Thornton, Brennan with his casual brutality. An entire system that functioned smoothly until someone like Marcus refused to make himself smaller. Now it was time to decide who he was going to be. Marcus looked up at Brennan, who was still staring at his phone like it had turned into a snake. "I need to make a phone call. It's my legal right." Brennan's eyes snapped up. For the first time, doubt flickered in them. "You'll get your call at the station. That call is going to cost you your job." Marcus's voice was quiet, matter-of-fact, containing no threat because it wasn't a threat, just information, just the truth waiting to unfold. One phone call, and everything changes. You might want to think about that before you make this worse. Brennan's jaw tightened, but his hand moved toward his pocket, toward his own phone, toward the possibility that maybe, just maybe, he'd made a mistake bigger than his authority could cover. Outside the small office, Flight 447 was preparing to push back. Vanessa Hartwell was settling into Seat 1A, accepting a champagne flute from Monica, feeling the satisfaction of having claimed what was rightfully hers. Captain Thornton was running through his pre-flight checks, secure in the righteousness of his decision, confident in his command. None of them knew yet. None of them understood what was coming. But they would. Very soon they would. Brennan's phone buzzed again. Then his radio crackled to life, a voice urgent and clipped cutting through the static. "All units, Flight 447, status check. Are we clear for pushback?" Brennan keyed his mic, eyes still on Marcus. "Negative. Subject in custody. Situation contained." The radio went silent for 3 seconds. Then a different voice, higher authority. "Officer Brennan, please confirm subject's name." Brennan pulled out the intake form he'd started filling out, squinted at the ID he'd confiscated. "Bennett, Marcus Bennett." The silence that followed stretched long enough that Brennan frowned, checking his radio to make sure it was still working. When the response came, the voice had changed texture entirely. losing its bureaucratic flatness and gaining something close to panic. Hold position. Do not transport. Repeat, do not transport subject to station. Maintain current location. Brennan's confusion was visible in the set of his shoulders, the way his free hand moved unconsciously toward his weapon before stopping. Dispatch, I need clarification. Subject was removed from aircraft for disruptive behavior. Standard protocol is, Brennan, this is Sector Chief Ramirez. You will keep that man exactly where he is. You will not process him. You will not move him. You will stand by for executive arrival. Do you copy? Executive arrival. Brennan's face went from pale to gray. Marcus watched the realization dawn, the way certainty crumbled into doubt, doubt into fear. Whatever information was flowing through official channels had just rewritten the story Brennan thought he understood. Copy that. Brennan's voice had lost its edge. He looked at Marcus with new eyes, reassessing, recalculating. Sir, I'm going to need you to remain seated while we sort this out. Marcus shifted in the chair, the handcuffs biting deeper. These cuffs are cutting off circulation. You need to loosen them or remove them. Brennan hesitated, caught between the authority that had put the cuffs on and the new authority that was apparently inbound. His hand moved toward his keys, then stopped. I can't do that until... Until what? Until you find out who I am? Marcus kept his voice level, but steel threaded through it. You already put hands on me, already injured me, already violated about 6 different protocols. The question is whether you're going to compound it by denying medical attention. The blood had slowed but not stopped, still seeping from the gash on Marcus's temple. His shirt was ruined, collar stiff with it. Brennan's eyes tracked the damage like he was seeing it for the first time, really seeing it, understanding that every drop would be documented, photographed, turned into evidence. Footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Fast, multiple people moving with purpose. The door opened without a knock, and a woman in her early 40s strode in wearing a tailored suit that cost more than Brennan made in a month. Her dark hair was pulled back in a way that suggested efficiency over style, and her eyes held the kind of focus that came from managing crises for a living. Behind her, 2 men in similar business attire, both carrying tablets, both radiating the controlled urgency of corporate firefighters arriving at a blaze. The woman's gaze went to Marcus first, cataloging the blood, the torn shirt, the handcuffs. Her jaw tightened. Then she turned to Brennan with the kind of authority that needed no introduction. Get those cuffs off him, now! Brennan didn't move. Ma'am, I don't know who you are, but this is a security matter and I can't just... I'm Catherine Blake, Chief Operating Officer of Skybridge Airways. That man is Marcus Bennett, Chairman of the Board and majority shareholder. You just assaulted my boss and your employer. Remove the cuffs. The words landed like physical blows. Brennan's hands shook as he fumbled for his keys, finally getting the cuffs unlocked. They fell away from Marcus's wrists, leaving deep red grooves in the skin, already purpling at the edges where the plastic had cut deepest. Marcus brought his hands forward slowly, flexing fingers that prickled with returning blood flow. The pain was sharp, immediate, grounding. He looked at Catherine, saw the controlled fury in her eyes, the calculation already running behind her professional mask. How bad? His voice was quieter than he intended, fatigue suddenly hitting him like a wave. Catherine moved closer, her hand hovering near his shoulder but not quite touching, asking permission. Marcus nodded. She leaned in, examining the gash on his temple with clinical precision. You need stitches. We have a medical team inbound, also legal PR and about 6 other departments that are currently losing their minds. One of the men behind her stepped forward, already pulling up something on his tablet. Sir, I'm David Chen from legal. We need to document everything before... He stopped, seeming to realize his mistake. I mean, with your permission, we should preserve evidence while it's fresh. Marcus almost laughed at the irony. Hours ago, multiple people had demanded documentation from him, verification of his right to exist in spaces he'd purchased access to. Now they wanted to document what had been done to him. preserve evidence of systematic failure. Photographs, video if you have it. I want everything. The second man, younger, maybe late 20s, pulled out a professional camera. I'm Ryan Foster, sir. Corporate communications. This is going to be rough. The camera clicked and flashed, capturing each angle of damage. The temple wound, still seeping. The abraded wrists dark against his skin. The torn shirt, blood-soaked collar. The scraped knees visible through ripped denim. Each image another piece of evidence. Another data point in the case that was already building. Brennan had backed against the wall, trying to make himself smaller, invisible. Catherine spared him a glance that could have frozen nitrogen. You're suspended pending investigation. Badge and credentials, now! Brennan unbuckled his belt with shaking hands, removed the badge and ID card, placed them on the table like an offering to an angry god. Ma'am, I was following protocol. The captain said, the captain doesn't give you permission to assault passengers. Catherine's voice could have cut glass. Airport security will handle the investigation. You're done here. Marcus pushed himself to standing, ignoring the way the room tilted slightly. What's the status of Flight 447? Catherine checked her phone, scrolling through what looked like a dozen simultaneous message threads. Still at the gate. Captain Thornton requested pushback clearance. I denied it. On what grounds? On the grounds that I'm the COO, and I said no. Catherine's expression was grim. He's not happy about it. Neither is your seat thief. Apparently she has meetings in Geneva that can't wait. Marcus felt something cold and final settle in his chest. Not anger, though that was there. Not even the desire for retribution, though he'd earned that right. Something cleaner, more surgical. The decision that came from seeing a system's true nature and choosing to either accept it or burn it down and rebuild. I want back on that plane. Catherine's eyes widened. Sir, with respect, you need medical attention first, and we need to discuss strategy, messaging, legal exposure. I want back on that plane exactly as I am. Blood, torn clothes, everything. Marcus met her gaze, letting her see the certainty there. They need to see what they did, all of them, every passenger who watched and did nothing, every crew member who enabled it. I want them to see me walk back on board. Catherine studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Legal is going to hate this. David looked up from his tablet, eyes wide. Sir, if you return to that aircraft, anything you say can be used in litigation. There are liability concerns, risk management protocols. Document everything, record everything. I don't care about liability right now. I care about accountability. Marcus turned to Ryan. You're going to film this, full video, unedited. I want every second preserved. Ryan glanced at Catherine, who gave a single sharp nod. He raised the camera. Ready when you are, sir. Marcus walked out of the security office, Catherine and her team flanking him like a protective detail. The gate area had transformed in the 30 minutes since he'd been dragged through it. News crews had somehow materialized, cameras and boom mics and reporters in positions they shouldn't have been able to access. Security was trying to establish a perimeter, but information had already leaked, the story already metastasizing into something bigger than one man removed from one flight. A reporter spotted Marcus and surged forward, microphone extended like a weapon. Mr. Bennett, can you comment on your treatment by Skybridge Security? Are you planning to sue? Catherine's hand came up. Professional deflection. No comment at this time. Please respect Mr. Bennett's privacy. But Marcus stopped walking, looked directly at the camera, let it capture the blood still wet on his face, the torn shirt, the marks on his wrists. What happened to me happens to people every day. The only difference is that I have the power to do something about it, and I will. The reporter's eyes lit up, smelling a story going from local incident to national news. What are you planning to do? Marcus didn't answer, just turned and walked toward the jetway, toward the aircraft that was still sitting at the gate, toward the confrontation that would define the next chapter of everything. The jetway smelled the same as before, recycled air and fuel, but it felt different now. Marcus's footsteps echoed against the metal floor, each one a count toward reckoning. Catherine walked beside him, her phone buzzing constantly, ignored. Ryan filmed from behind, camera capturing the slow walk toward the aircraft door. The flight attendants at the entrance were different from before. Monica had been replaced by a senior purser Marcus didn't recognize, an older woman whose face went pale when she saw him. Behind her, two other crew members, both staring like they'd seen a ghost. The senior purser found her voice first. "Mr. Bennett, sir, we were told—" She stopped, seeming to realize anything she said would be inadequate. Marcus stepped past her without responding, into the first-class cabin where everything had started, where assumptions had calcified into action, where the machinery of discrimination had functioned exactly as designed. The cabin had filled since his removal. All 8 first-class seats now occupied, passengers who'd boarded during the delay settling into leather and privilege. They looked up as Marcus entered, their expressions cycling through confusion, recognition, shock, horror, as they processed the bloodied man in torn clothes standing in the aisle. Vanessa Hartwell sat in 1A, champagne flute halfway to her lips, frozen in the exact posture of entitled comfort Marcus had interrupted earlier. Her face went through its own transformation, confusion shifting to recognition, recognition to disbelief, disbelief to something approaching terror. Marcus walked slowly down the aisle, letting everyone see him, letting them register what their silence had enabled, what their complicity had produced. Blood on the carpet where he'd been dragged. His blood dried now, a trail of evidence that industrial cleaners would try to erase but cameras had already preserved. He stopped at row 1, looked down at Vanessa in his seat. "Ma'am, you're in my seat." Vanessa's hand trembled, champagne sloshing against crystal. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. No words came out. The practiced certainty that had carried her through their earlier confrontation had evaporated, leaving only the naked realization that she'd made a catastrophic miscalculation. Behind Marcus, Catherine spoke with quiet authority. "Ms. Hartwell, you need to move. Now." Vanessa tried to find her voice, some thread of the confidence that had let her dismiss Marcus as unworthy of first class. "I don't. This is my seat. I paid for—" "You didn't pay for anything." Marcus's voice was soft, almost gentle, which made it more devastating than shouting would have been. "I paid for this seat 3 months ago. You had a confirmed reservation in 4B. What you did was demand that I be removed because you decided I didn't belong. Because you looked at me and made assumptions about who I was and what I deserved, and everyone around you agreed. The crew agreed, the captain agreed, security agreed. An entire system agreed that I should be dragged bleeding from this aircraft so you could sit in a seat that was never yours." The cabin was absolutely silent. No one moved. Several phones were out, recording but quietly now, trying not to draw attention. The businessman who'd live-tweeted Marcus's removal had his screen down, face ashen. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears, but they looked more like fear than remorse. "I didn't know. I didn't know who you were." The words hung there, revealing everything. Not an apology for her actions, but regret for choosing the wrong target. If Marcus had been anyone else, anyone without power, her behavior would have been perfectly acceptable in her worldview. The problem wasn't what she'd done. It was that she'd done it to someone who could fight back. Marcus felt the weight of that understanding settle over him. This wasn't about Vanessa specifically. She was a symptom, not the disease. The disease was the system that had validated her at every step, that had given her power over him through nothing more than assumptions about who belonged and who didn't. "I know you didn't know." Marcus kept his voice level, factual. "That's the point. You didn't need to know. You saw someone who didn't match your expectations and you felt entitled to remove them. The crew didn't question you. The captain didn't question you. Security didn't question you. Because the system is designed to believe people like you and question people like me. Catherine stepped forward, phone in hand. Ms. Hartwell, airport police are on their way. You're being detained for assault, filing false complaints, and interfering with aircraft operations. You need to gather your belongings and exit the aircraft. Vanessa's tears came faster now, mascara tracking down her face. Please, I made a mistake. I'm sorry, I didn't mean. You meant exactly what you did. Marcus moved past her, claiming the overhead bin space where his bag should have been. Would have been if the last hour hadn't happened. You meant to assert your dominance. You meant to put me in what you considered my place. You meant every word of what you said and every assumption behind those words. 2 airport police officers entered the cabin, different from Brennan, older, their faces neutral but their eyes taking in every detail. The senior officer approached Vanessa with careful professionalism. Ma'am, we need you to come with us. Vanessa looked around the cabin, desperate, searching for an ally, someone who would intervene on her behalf the way the crew had earlier. But the other passengers had their eyes down, suddenly fascinated by their phones, their magazines, the safety card they'd ignored during the demonstration. No one met her gaze, no one spoke up. She gathered her designer bag with shaking hands, stood on unsteady legs, let the officers guide her toward the exit. As she passed Marcus, she tried once more. I'll lose everything. Please, my job, my reputation, please don't do this. Marcus watched her go, feeling no satisfaction in her fear, no pleasure in her fall, just the cold certainty that came from understanding that her loss was necessary. Not for revenge, but for the fundamental truth that systems only changed when the people who benefited from injustice finally faced consequences that mattered. The cabin door closed behind Vanessa. The silence that followed was different from before, heavier, weighted with the understanding that everyone present had just witnessed something that would have repercussions far beyond this single flight. Marcus turned to face the remaining passengers, blood still drying on his face, shirt still torn and stained, wrists still bearing the marks of handcuffs that shouldn't have been applied. He let them see all of it. My name is Marcus Bennett. I own Skybridge Airways. I'm the chairman of the board and majority shareholder. His voice carried through the cabin, quiet but absolute. What happened to me in the last hour should never happen to anyone. Not because of who I am, but because it's fundamentally wrong. But it does happen, every day, to people who don't have cameras recording, who don't have legal teams on speed dial, who don't have the power to demand accountability. Catherine had positioned herself near the galley, phone still in hand, coordinating something Marcus couldn't see but trusted was important. Ryan's camera captured everything, the lens an unblinking witness. Marcus continued. Captain Caldwell Thornton made a decision to remove me from this aircraft based solely on the word of a flight attendant who sided with a passenger making racist assumptions. He didn't ask for my side of the story, didn't check the facts, didn't question whether the situation was being handled fairly. He saw a problem that needed removing, and I was that problem because I refused to make myself smaller to accommodate someone else's entitlement. He paused, letting that sink in. Several passengers were crying now. The woman in pearls who'd watched earlier had her hand over her mouth, shoulders shaking. The businessman who'd been annoyed by the delay had his head down, unable to meet Marcus's eyes. In approximately 30 seconds, Captain Thornton is going to receive notification that he's been terminated, effective immediately. He will not fly another commercial aircraft for any airline in this country. Not because I'm vindictive, but because he demonstrated that when faced with a choice between justice and convenience, he chose convenience, and that choice put a passenger's safety at risk. Catherine tapped her phone. In the cockpit, Marcus heard the muffled sound of notification chimes, then silence. Then the cockpit door opened and Thornton emerged, his face red with fury and confusion. What the hell is going on? I've been locked out of the flight systems. My credentials are... He stopped when he saw Marcus. The blood, the torn clothes, the calm certainty in Marcus's stance. Thornton's face went through its own transformation, anger bleeding into shock, shock into the first dawning of understanding. "Captain Thornton, you're fired." Marcus's voice held no anger, just finality. "You'll receive formal notification from HR within the hour. Security will escort you from the aircraft. Your personal effects will be collected and returned to you within 24 hours. You're banned from all Skybridge properties and aircraft effective immediately." Thornton's mouth worked soundlessly. Then the words came, defensive, disbelieving. "You can't do this. I followed protocol," the flight attendant said. "You followed the protocol of believing what was easier to believe. You made a decision to trust the word of your crew over the evidence in front of you. You didn't ask for my boarding pass, didn't verify the facts, didn't question whether maybe, just maybe, the passenger being accused of disruption was actually the victim of it." Marcus felt the fatigue starting to set in, the adrenaline crash approaching. "On your aircraft, you said you were the law. Well, on this airline, I'm the law, and you're done." Airport police moved forward, the same two who'd removed Vanessa. Thornton looked at them, at Marcus, at Catherine, who was already typing on her phone, documenting everything. His pilot's uniform, which had been armor earlier, now looked like a costume he had no right to wear. They led him away. He went quietly, the fight draining out of him as reality caught up with the consequences of his certainty. Marcus turned to Catherine. "Where's Diane Merrick?" Catherine checked her phone. "Gate 47, still on shift, still checking in passengers for other flights. She doesn't know yet. Let's fix that." They walked back through the jetway, Ryan still filming, capturing every moment. The gate area had somehow accumulated even more reporters, more cameras, more people who'd heard something was happening and wanted to witness it firsthand. Security had given up trying to maintain any perimeter, instead just trying to keep the crowd from blocking the jetway itself. Diane stood at the counter, scanning boarding passes for a different flight. Her movements routine, practiced, unaware that her world was about to tilt on its axis. She looked up as Marcus approached, and her face went through the same cycle as Vanessa's. Thornton's. Confusion, recognition, shock, fear. Marcus stopped on the other side of the counter, separated from her by the desk and the computer and the systematic assumptions that desk represented. "Miss Merrick, do you remember me?" Diane's hand trembled on the scanner. "Mr. Bennett, sir, I was just doing my job, following procedure. The passenger seemed upset and I thought, you thought I didn't belong in first class. You thought my ticket must be a mistake. You thought someone who looked like me, dressed like me, couldn't possibly have paid full price for premium seating." Marcus kept his voice even, not accusing, just stating facts. "You held me at the gate for 10 minutes while you verified my legitimacy. Verification you've never requested from passengers who match your expectations of what first class looks like." Diane shook her head, desperate. "No, that's not. I verify tickets all the time. It's random. It's not random." Catherine stepped forward, tablet in hand. "We pulled your verification request for the last 6 months, 47 additional checks, all passengers of color. Not one white passenger. Want to explain that pattern?" Diane's face crumpled. Behind her, other gate agents had stopped working, watching this confrontation with the understanding that it could have been any of them. That Diane wasn't unique, just unlucky enough to have chosen the wrong passenger to doubt. Marcus pulled out his phone, pulled up the email he'd drafted in his head during the walk from the aircraft, sent it to Catherine with a single tap. "Ms. Merrick, you're terminated effective immediately. You'll receive formal notification within the hour. Security will escort you from the airport. You're banned from all Skybridge properties indefinitely." Diane tried to speak, couldn't, just stood there while security appeared to guide her away from the desk, away from the job she'd held for 22 years, away from the career she'd built on assumptions she'd never examined. The other gate agents looked at Marcus with new understanding. This wasn't just about Diane, about Thornton, about Vanessa. This was about every interaction, every assumption, every moment when they'd chosen convenience over fairness because convenience was easier and fairness required work. Marcus's phone buzzed. A text from Catherine. Derek Hartwell inbound. Private jet landing in 15 minutes. Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. Of course Vanessa's husband was coming. Of course there would be another confrontation, another attempt to use power and position to avoid consequences. He almost smiled at the predictability of it. He walked to a chair near the windows overlooking the tarmac, sat carefully, feeling every bruise, every scrape, every place where violence had left its mark. Ryan positioned himself nearby, camera still rolling. Catherine made phone calls, her voice low and urgent, coordinating whatever came next. The minutes ticked past. Marcus watched aircraft taxi, take off, land. The ordinary operations of an airport continuing while inside Terminal 4, dominoes kept falling. His phone showed notifications flooding in, news alerts, social media mentions. The video of his removal had gone nuclear, trending on every platform, shared by celebrities and activists and ordinary people who saw in his experience an echo of their own. 10 million views. 20 million. The number climbed faster than Marcus could track. Each view a witness, each share an amplification of what had happened and what it meant. A sleek private jet touched down on the executive runway, taxied to the private terminal. Marcus watched it park, watched the door open, watched a man in an expensive suit storm down the stairs like he was arriving to save the day. Derek Hartwell, Vanessa's husband, Vice President of Global Logistics at FuelMax Corporation. A man who'd built his career on relationships and leverage and the assumption that power was currency that could buy anything. Marcus stood as Derek entered the terminal, flanked by what looked like personal security, moving with the confidence of someone who expected obstacles to dissolve before him. He spotted Marcus and changed trajectory, approaching with fury radiating off him like heat. "You!" Derek's voice carried across the terminal. "You destroyed my wife, had her arrested like a common criminal. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Marcus stayed very still, hands visible, aware that cameras were everywhere, that every word would be preserved and analyzed. "Your wife attempted to have me removed from a seat I'd legally purchased. She made racist assumptions and demanded the crew act on them. She's facing the consequences of her choices." Derek got close, too close, invading space in a way designed to intimidate. "Consequences? She made a mistake. She thought I didn't belong, based on nothing but what I look like." Marcus held his ground, and an entire system agreed with her. "Including you, apparently." Derek's face flushed darker. "You have no idea who you're messing with. FuelMax supplies jet fuel to 60% of the airports on the eastern seaboard. One phone call from me and your fleet is grounded. Every single aircraft." The threat hung in the air, heavy with the weight Derek clearly thought it carried. Marcus saw Catherine tense, saw the flicker of concern cross her face, saw Derek register that reaction and mistake it for weakness. Marcus pulled out his phone, scrolled through his contacts, found the number he needed. Put the call on speaker. It rang twice before a voice answered, warm and professional. "Jonathan Pierce." Derek's eyes widened. Jonathan Pierce, CEO of FuelMax Corporation, Derek's boss, the man whose authority Derek had just invoked as a weapon. "Jonathan, it's Marcus Bennett. Sorry to bother you on a Thursday." Jonathan's warmth increased. "Marcus, no bother at all. How are things? Still on track for that Geneva acquisition?" "Actually, I'm at JFK. Had an incident with one of your employees, Derek Hartwell. He's standing in front of me right now, claiming he can ground my fleet with a phone call." The silence on the other end stretched for 3 seconds. Marcus watched Derek's face cycle through emotions, landing on something close to terror. Jonathan's voice, when it came back, had lost all warmth. "Derek Hartwell? He's there? At JFK?" "Yes. He seems upset about his wife being arrested for assault and discrimination. He just threatened my airline's fuel supply as leverage. Derek's mouth opened. No sound came out. Marcus. Jonathan's tone had gone formal, corporate, the voice of a man protecting his company from liability. I'm going to need you to put Derek on the line. Marcus held out his phone. Derek stared at it like it was a snake, but slowly, inevitably, he took it. John, this is a misunderstanding. Vanessa was humiliated, arrested, and I was just... Jonathan's voice came through loud enough for Marcus to hear. Derek, did you just threaten to weaponize FuelMax's business relationships for personal reasons? Derek swallowed. No, I mean, I was just... Did you tell Marcus Bennett that you could ground his airline's fleet? It was just talk. I wasn't actually going to... You're fired. Jonathan's voice was flat, final. Effective immediately. Hand your company credentials to Marcus. Do not go to the office. Do not contact any FuelMax clients. Legal will be in touch within the hour. Security is being notified now. Derek's hand shook, the phone trembling against his ear. John, please. 20 years. I've given this company 20 years. You can't... I can, and I am. Your judgment is compromised, your ethics are questionable, and you just created massive legal exposure for FuelMax by threatening a business partner. You're done, Derek. Hand Marcus your credentials, now. The call ended. Derek stood frozen, still holding Marcus's phone, his face the color of old paper. Slowly, mechanically, he reached into his jacket, pulled out his FuelMax badge and ID card, placed them in Marcus's outstretched hand, like he was surrendering weapons after a defeat. Marcus pocketed them. You're going to want to call a lawyer. Your wife's facing federal charges. You just lost your job. And I imagine there are going to be additional consequences once this story finishes spreading. Derek's mouth worked soundlessly. His security detail had backed away, suddenly unwilling to be associated with him. He looked around the terminal, at the cameras, the witnesses, the documented evidence of his spectacular miscalculation. You destroyed us. His voice was barely a whisper. Over a seat. Over one goddamn seat. Marcus felt no triumph in Derek's collapse, no satisfaction in watching a marriage and 2 careers implode in real time. Just the cold necessity of it. The understanding that nothing would change if the people who enabled injustice never faced costs that mattered. It was never about the seat. Marcus's voice was gentle, almost kind, which somehow made it more devastating. It was about the assumptions behind demanding that seat, about the system that validated those assumptions, about the choice to use power to crush someone instead of examining whether that power was being used justly. Derek turned and walked away, diminished, his expensive suit hanging on him like costume clothing on someone who'd lost the right to the role. His security detail followed at a distance, professionals who understood when to abandon a sinking ship. Marcus sat back down, exhaustion crashing over him in waves. Catherine appeared with a medical kit, started cleaning the gash on his temple with gentle efficiency. Paramedics are on standby if you want to go to the hospital. Later, Marcus winced as antiseptic hit raw flesh. There's one more thing I need to do first. Catherine paused, gauze in hand. What? I need to upgrade a passenger, someone flying economy, someone who deserves better than what they booked. Catherine's expression softened. You have someone in mind? Marcus thought about the passengers who'd watched his removal, who'd filmed but not intervened, who'd been complicit through their silence. He thought about the system that had functioned exactly as designed until he'd had the power to jam the gears. He thought about his father's words about staying calm, about letting people show you who they are. Find me a passenger in main cabin who's working towards something. Student, someone with purpose. Someone the system has told doesn't belong in first class, who believes it because they've never been given reason to think otherwise. Catherine nodded, pulled out her tablet, started scrolling through manifests. 2 minutes later, she looked up. Jasmine Torres, 23, flying to Geneva for a medical fellowship interview. Seat 32B medical school loans, working 2 jobs, bought the cheapest ticket available. Marcus stood. Let's go find her. They walked through the terminal, through business class, into the main cabin where space tightened and comfort became theoretical. Row 32B held a young woman with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Medical textbooks open in her lap, highlighter moving across dense paragraphs about pharmacology. She was so absorbed she didn't notice Marcus until he stopped beside her seat. Jasmine looked up, eyes widening as she registered the blood on Marcus's face, the torn shirt, the official-looking woman beside him. Fear flickered across her features, the automatic response of someone who'd learned that authority approaching usually meant problems. Jasmine Torres? Marcus kept his voice soft, non-threatening. Yes? Her hands had moved protectively over her textbooks as if they might be confiscated. I'm Marcus Bennett. I own this airline. I've had a difficult morning and I'd like to do something about it. That seat you're in, 32B, is not where you belong today. I'm moving you to first class, seat 1A. Everything's complimentary. I just need you to pack your things. Jasmine stared at him like he'd started speaking a language she didn't understand. I'm sorry, what? Catherine stepped in, her professional warmth cutting through confusion. Ms. Torres, we're upgrading you to first class. No charge. Just gather your belongings and we'll escort you forward. Jasmine's eyes filled with tears. I can't afford an upgrade. I used every penny I had just to buy this ticket. The interview is my one shot at this fellowship and I can't. You're not paying! Marcus crouched down so they were at eye level, ignoring the pain in his knees. Someone tried to take something from me today because she thought I didn't deserve it. I want to give something to you because you do deserve it. Consider it an investment in the future, Dr. Torres. Jasmine's hands shook as she closed her textbook, gathered her worn backpack, stood on unsteady legs. She looked at Marcus, at Catherine, back to Marcus. Why me? Because you're working towards something that matters. Because the system has probably told you 1,000 times that you don't belong in certain spaces. And I want you to know that's a lie. You belong anywhere you have the courage to go. They walked back through the aircraft, Jasmine between Marcus and Catherine, her backpack clutched to her chest like armor. Other passengers watched with curiosity, with envy, with the beginning of understanding that something larger than a simple upgrade was happening. In first class, the remaining passengers had been quiet since Marcus's earlier speech. They looked up as Jasmine entered, saw her worn clothes, her obvious poverty, her terror and hope mixed in equal measure. Marcus guided her to 1A, the seat Vanessa had claimed, the seat that had started everything. This is yours. Sit, rest, study if you need to. The crew will take care of you. Marcus helped stow her backpack, then stepped back. And Jasmine, you're going to crush that interview. Trust that. Jasmine sat, her hands running over the leather armrests like she was touching something sacred. Tears tracked down her face, unchecked. Thank you. Thank you. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything. Just remember this when you're Dr. Torres and someone tells you a patient doesn't deserve care because of what they look like or where they come from. Remember that justice is a choice we make every single day. Marcus walked back to the galley where Catherine waited with the paramedics who'd finally arrived. They cleaned his wounds properly, butterfly stitched the gash on his temple, wrapped his wrists, checked for concussion. He answered their questions mechanically, his mind already moving to what came next. The investigation, the lawsuits, the systematic review of every policy, every procedure, every training program that had created the conditions for this morning to happen. The past victims who'd suffered similar treatment but hadn't had cameras recording, hadn't had the power to demand justice. His phone showed 47 complaints filed in the last 18 months. All passengers of color, all involving additional verification, extra screening, skepticism about their right to be in premium cabins, a pattern so clear it would be undeniable in any courtroom, any board meeting, any congressional hearing that might follow. Catherine approached, phone in hand. Sir, we need to discuss next steps. Legal wants to meet. PR needs a statement, the board is calling emergency sessions, and the FAA has opened an investigation. Marcus nodded, feeling the full weight of what he'd set in motion. This wasn't over. This was barely beginning. Every domino that had fallen would trigger others, consequences rippling outward in ways he couldn't fully predict or control, but that was the point. Real change was never controlled, never safe, never convenient. It was messy and dangerous and required breaking things that had functioned perfectly well for the people who benefited from them. Schedule it all. Marcus stood slowly, letting the paramedics help him. But first, I need to make a few more calls. There are 46 other people who deserve to hear that what happened to them mattered, that it's being addressed, that they weren't crazy for thinking they'd been treated differently. Catherine's expression softened. We'll set it up. Sir, for what it's worth, what you did today will change this industry. Marcus looked back at the first-class cabin, at Jasmine studying in 1A, at the other passengers who'd been forced to confront their own complicity. Change had started, but it wouldn't finish here, wouldn't finish today, wouldn't finish with just one airline or one incident. The real work was just beginning, and Marcus was ready for it. 3 weeks after JFK Terminal 4 became the epicenter of a national conversation about dignity and discrimination, Marcus sat in a wood-paneled hearing room in Washington, D.C., facing 12 members of the Federal Transportation Oversight Committee. The room smelled like old leather and bureaucracy. Walls lined with portraits of past committee chairs who'd presided over their own crises, their own reckonings. Morning light filtered through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that drifted like witnesses to history being made. Senator Blake Morrison, 62, silver hair and the kind of face that had survived 3 decades of political combat, leaned forward over his microphone. Mr. Bennett, critics have characterized your actions as an abuse of power. That grounding a commercial aircraft over what they're calling a seating dispute sets a dangerous precedent for executive overreach. How do you respond? Marcus sat alone at the witness table, no lawyers flanking him despite Catherine's protests. He wore a suit today, tailored but understated, the bandage on his temple the only visible reminder of what had happened. His wrists still bore faint marks from the handcuffs, shadows that wouldn't fully fade for another month. Senator, with respect, it wasn't a seating dispute. It was a civil rights violation that escalated to assault. Marcus's voice carried through the chamber without needing amplification. A passenger demanded my removal based solely on racial assumptions. The crew validated those assumptions. The captain authorized violence to enforce them. Security executed that violence. At what point in that chain should I have accepted being bloodied and dragged from an aircraft I own, from a seat I'd legally purchased, simply to avoid appearing difficult? Morrison's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe. The understanding that Marcus had just reframed the entire narrative. But you could have handled it through proper channels afterward, filed complaints, pursued legal remedies. Instead, you used your position to immediately terminate employees, ground the aircraft, create what some are calling a corporate purge. Proper channels had failed 47 other passengers who experienced similar treatment on my airline alone. Marcus pulled out a folder, set it on the table. Every complaint filed, every incident reported, every time someone was questioned about their right to be in a seat they'd purchased, all dismissed through proper channels because the system was designed to protect the crew's judgment, not the passenger's dignity. Proper channels only work when the people managing those channels believe the complaints are valid. Mine weren't, until I had enough power to make people believe. Congresswoman Janet Yu, 48, representing a district in California with significant Asian American population, picked up her pen. Mr. Bennett, you discovered a pattern of complaints, systematic discrimination over 18 months. What did your investigation reveal about how those complaints were handled? Marcus opened the folder, pulled out a single page of statistics Catherine's team had compiled. Of the 47 complaints filed by passengers of color regarding discriminatory treatment, 43 were coded as customer service issues and closed without investigation. 3 were flagged for review but never actually reviewed. 1 resulted in mandatory retraining for the employee involved, who continued the same behavior for another 11 months until she was involved in my removal. You made a note. And what systemic failures allowed this pattern to continue? The complaints went to regional managers who had performance metrics tied to customer satisfaction and crew retention. Investigating discrimination claims threatened both metrics, so the incentive structure rewarded dismissing complaints rather than addressing them. Marcus leaned forward slightly. The system wasn't broken. It was functioning exactly as designed, protecting the airline's operational efficiency at the expense of passenger dignity. A Republican senator from Texas, William Hayes, 65, cleared his throat. Mr. Bennett, you talk about dignity, but what about the dignity of the employees you fired? Captain Thornton served 30 years in aviation, Ms. Merrick 22 years. You destroyed their careers over one incident. Doesn't that strike you as disproportionate? Marcus felt the question land, knew it was designed to paint him as vindictive, as using power to crush people who'd made simple mistakes. He chose his words carefully. Senator Hayes, if I'd discovered that Captain Thornton had one bad day, made one error in judgment after 30 years of fair treatment, we wouldn't be here. But his personnel file shows 14 complaints in the last 6 years. All from passengers of color, all dismissed. Ms. Merrick had similar patterns. This wasn't one incident. It was a career built on assumptions they never examined and a system that never made them. Hayes wasn't satisfied. But firing them immediately, publicly, without due process? They were given the same due process they gave me, which is to say their credibility was questioned, their explanations were dismissed, and they were removed from a space they felt entitled to occupy. Marcus paused, letting that parallel settle. The difference is my removal came with handcuffs and blood. Theirs came with severance packages and the opportunity to find other work, though not in an industry where they demonstrated they couldn't be trusted with power over vulnerable people. The hearing continued for another 90 minutes. Questions probing every decision Marcus had made, every termination, every policy change. He answered them all without deflection, without apology, laying out the systematic nature of the problem and the systematic nature of his response. When it finally ended, Marcus walked out into hallway chaos. Reporters surged forward, cameras and microphones creating a wall of attention. Catherine materialized at his elbow, her team forming a protective corridor through the press. Mr. Bennett, will you sue Vanessa Hartwell personally? Are you worried about backlash from firing so many employees? Critics say you're using one incident to push a political agenda. How do you respond? Marcus stopped walking, turned to face the cameras. Catherine tensed beside him but didn't interfere. I'm not pushing an agenda. I'm requiring accountability. Those aren't the same thing, though I understand why people who've never faced accountability might confuse them. The quote would be on every news site within an hour, analyzed and dissected and debated. Marcus didn't care. He'd stopped caring about optics 3 weeks ago when he'd decided that truth mattered more than perception. Back in New York, the criminal trials were already underway. Diane Merrick sat in a federal courtroom, her lawyer arguing for leniency, for understanding, for recognition that she'd been following cultural norms she'd never been taught to question. The prosecutor, a black woman in her 40s who'd probably experienced her own version of Diane's assumptions, was having none of it. Ms. Merrick, you pulled Mr. Bennett aside at the gate and held him for additional verification. Why? Diane's voice was small, frightened. I thought there might be an issue with his ticket. What specifically made you think that? It was a first-class ticket, an expensive ticket, and he didn't look like he could afford it. How does someone who can afford a first-class ticket look, Ms. Merrick? Silence, the kind that filled courtrooms when truth became unavoidable. The prosecutor pulled up a video on the monitor, footage from the gate that day. This is the passenger who checked in directly before Mr. Bennett, a white man in jeans and a t-shirt. Did you perform additional verification for him? Diane watched the screen, watched herself smile and wave the white passenger through without a second glance. No. This is the passenger who checked in directly after Mr. Bennett, a white woman in athletic wear, headphones on, clearly dressed casually. Did you verify her ticket? No. So what was different about Mr. Bennett that triggered your additional scrutiny? Diane's lawyer objected, but the question had already done its work. The jury, 8 members of which were people of color, had their answer written on their face. The verdict came back after 4 hours of deliberation. Guilty of civil rights violations under federal law. 18 months in federal prison, $50,000 in fines, permanent ban from working in the transportation industry. Diane wept as the sentence was read, her 22-year career reduced to evidence of systematic failure, her assumptions codified into criminal conviction. Captain Caldwell Thornton's trial followed a similar pattern, though his defense was more aggressive, arguing that he'd acted within his authority as pilot in command, that safety concerns justified his decision. The prosecution dismantled that argument with surgical precision. Captain Thornton, you testified that you believed Mr. Bennett posed a safety risk. What specific behavior led you to that conclusion? Thornton, still wearing his uniform despite having lost his license, straightened in his chair. The flight attendant reported he was being confrontational, refusing to cooperate. The flight attendant reported, or you witnessed directly? The flight attendant reported. And you trusted that report without verification because? Because my crew are trained professionals. I trust their judgment. The prosecutor pulled up Thornton's personnel file, displayed it on the screen. In 30 years of flying, how many times have you ordered passengers removed from your aircraft? I don't recall the exact number. According to airline records, 43 times. Of those 43 passengers, how many were white? Thornton's jaw tightened. I didn't keep track of passenger demographics. The airline did. 7. 7 out of 43 removed passengers were white. The other 36 were passengers of color. Does that seem like an anomaly to you, Captain? Thornton had no answer that wouldn't condemn him. His verdict, guilty. 2 years federal prison, loss of pilot license, $75,000 in fines. His wife filed for divorce before the sentencing was complete, unable to reconcile the man she'd married with the pattern the trial had revealed. Vanessa Hartwell's case was different, more complex because her charges included assault and false reporting alongside the civil rights violations. She'd hired an expensive legal team that argued she'd been a victim of Marcus's abuse of power, that she genuinely believed the seat was hers, that racial bias hadn't factored into her thinking. The jury watched the cabin footage, heard her voice telling Marcus to go back where he belonged, saw her attempt to bribe him with cash like he was a service worker who could be bought. They deliberated for 6 hours before returning a verdict that split the charges. Not guilty of assault, the physical contact too brief to meet the legal threshold. Guilty of making false reports to crew, guilty of discrimination, guilty of creating the situation that led to Marcus's removal. The civil judgment that followed was more devastating than the criminal conviction. Marcus's lawsuit, filed not for money but for precedent, sought $8 million in damages to be donated to organizations fighting transportation discrimination. Vanessa's lawyers argued the amount was punitive, excessive, designed to destroy rather than compensate. The jury awarded the full $8 million. Vanessa's law firm, a white shoe practice in Manhattan that couldn't afford the association with her case, terminated her partnership the same day. Her legal career, built over 15 years of climbing the prestige ladder, collapsed in the time it took to read a verdict. Derek Hartwell's fall was less formal but more complete. Fuelmax's termination held despite his lawyer's threats of wrongful dismissal suits. No fuel company would hire him. the industry too small and too interconnected to risk the liability his name now carried. He'd tried consulting, but potential clients ran background checks and found the videos, the articles, the systematic documentation of his spectacular miscalculation at JFK. 6 months after the incident, Marcus received a voicemail. Derek's voice, stripped of its earlier aggression, reduced to something hollow and desperate. "Mr. Bennett, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything. But I wanted you to know that I understand now what I did, what we did. The divorce is final. I'm selling the house. I'm working at a logistics company making 40% of what I used to make. And I'm doing it because I need to rebuild from a place where nobody owes me anything, where I have to earn respect instead of demanding it. I'm sorry for what that's worth. I'm sorry." Marcus listened to the message twice, then deleted it. Not out of cruelty, but because Derek's redemption arc wasn't his responsibility. The system had given Derek opportunities to choose differently at every stage. He'd chosen entitlement. Now he was learning the costs. Silas Brennan's case diverged from the others because his actions had been more directly violent, more immediately documented. The video of him dragging Marcus down the aisle, blood visible on Marcus's face, had been viewed over 50 million times. Civil rights organizations had made him a symbol, a representative of every time security had used force disproportionately against people of color. But Brennan had done something the others hadn't. He'd cooperated fully with investigators, provided detailed accounts of his training, his orders, his decisions in that moment. He'd taken responsibility without trying to shift blame to the captain or crew. And crucially, he'd enrolled in de-escalation training on his own initiative before the trial, before sentencing, because he genuinely believed he'd failed at his fundamental job of keeping people safe. The prosecution still pushed for prison time. Community advocates demanded it. But Marcus, when asked for a victim impact statement, surprised everyone by requesting leniency. Officer Brennan followed orders from authority he'd been trained to trust. He used force he'd been taught was appropriate for non-compliance. He made split-second decisions under pressure, and those decisions were wrong. But unlike every other person who contributed to what happened to me, Brennan acknowledged the wrong without qualification. He didn't blame me for resisting, didn't claim he feared for his safety, didn't hide behind protocol. He owned it. The judge took Marcus's statement into consideration. Brennan received a suspended sentence, mandatory retraining, and community service teaching de-escalation techniques to other security personnel. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was recognition that accountability could include rehabilitation when someone demonstrated genuine commitment to change. Brennan's first training session included testimony about what he'd done wrong, walking new security officers through his decisions and their consequences. "I saw a black man in handcuffs and I assumed he was dangerous. I didn't see the blood and think I should de-escalate. I saw resistance where there was compliance, and I used force because force was easy, because my training emphasized control over care, because I'd done it before and never faced consequences. This time I did, and that's the only reason I'm here instead of him." The systematic reforms Marcus had demanded were rolling out across Skybridge's entire operation. Catherine had overseen the implementation, treating it with the urgency of a crisis response, because that's what it was. Every employee, from gate agents to executives, underwent mandatory bias training. Not the performative kind that checked boxes, but intensive sessions facilitated by outside experts who didn't let people hide behind good intentions. The complaint system was rebuilt from scratch, routed through independent third-party investigators who had no stake in protecting airline operations. Every complaint of discrimination triggered automatic review, with metrics tracking not just whether complaints were filed, but how they were resolved and whether patterns emerged. The lifetime status tiers were eliminated entirely, replaced with a flat recognition system that rewarded loyalty without creating castes of passengers who felt entitled to special treatment. The change had been controversial, Diamond members threatening to switch airlines, but Marcus had been unmovable on the principle. Loyalty is valuable, entitlement is toxic, will reward the first without enabling the second. 3 months after the incident, the Federal Aviation Administration issued new nationwide guidelines directly citing Marcus's case as the catalyst. Mandatory body cameras for air marshals and security personnel. Clear protocols for passenger removal that required documented behavior rather than crew judgment alone. Penalties for airlines that showed statistical patterns of discriminatory enforcement. 47 other airlines adopted similar reforms, some voluntarily, others under pressure from regulators and public opinion. The industry publication Aviation Weekly ran a cover story. The Bennett Effect, how one incident changed transportation forever. Marcus read the article in his office, the same modest space he'd occupied before becoming a household name, before his face became synonymous with the collision between injustice and accountability. The article quoted industry analysts predicting the changes would cost airlines billions in retraining and oversight. Marcus felt no guilt about that cost. Systems that functioned through discrimination had always been expensive. The expense had just been borne by people whose suffering was easier to ignore than spreadsheet impacts. His phone rang. Catherine's extension. "Sir, Jasmine Torres is here for the scholarship announcement. The other recipients are gathering in the conference room." Marcus stood, straightening his tie, feeling the familiar mix of anticipation and responsibility that came with these moments. The scholarship fund had been his first decision after the trials ended. Converting the civil judgment from Vanessa's case plus $50 million of his own money into an endowment for medical students from underserved communities. The conference room held 10 students, ages ranging from 22 to 35, each one representing a different path that had been made harder by systems that assumed certain people didn't belong in medicine. Jasmine stood near the window, no longer wearing her worn university hoodie but a professional dress that still showed signs of having been bought on a budget. She smiled when Marcus entered, but her eyes held tears she was trying to control. "Dr. Torres." Marcus used her title deliberately, acknowledging the fellowship she'd won, the future she'd earned. "Thank you for being here." Jasmine's smile widened, though the tears broke free. "You know I wouldn't miss this. You changed my life that day. Everything that came after, the fellowship, medical school graduation, all of it started because you saw me. I saw someone who deserved an opportunity. What you did with it was all you." Marcus turned to address the full room. "Everyone here has a story about systems that told you that you didn't belong, that questioned your scores, your recommendations, your right to be in the room where medicine happens. This scholarship exists because those systems are wrong and because fighting them requires resources most people don't have." He handed each student a folder, thick with documentation. Full tuition coverage, stipends for living expenses, mentorship pairings with established physicians, research opportunities, everything that money could provide to level a playing field that had never been level. A young man named Carlos Rivera, 24, from a border town in Texas opened his folder and had to sit down. "This is real? Full tuition? I was going to take out $200,000 in loans." "It's real, and it comes with one requirement." Marcus waited until all 10 students were looking at him. "When you're Dr. Rivera, when you have the letters after your name and the authority that comes with them, remember what it felt like to be questioned, and use your power to make sure the next generation faces less doubt than you did." The ceremony continued, photos taken, press releases distributed, Marcus's communications team documenting everything for the inevitable news cycle. But Marcus's attention kept drifting to the window, to the city beyond, to the thought of how many similar announcements were happening elsewhere. How many other people were finding opportunities because a system had finally been forced to acknowledge its failures. His calendar showed a meeting in an hour with the board of directors, his first since the incident. They'd been supportive publicly, had to be with the media scrutiny and shareholder pressure. But privately, several board members had expressed concern about the financial impacts of his reforms, the potential liability exposure, the risk that Marcus's personal crusade might damage the company's market position. Marcus arrived early, taking his seat at the head of the conference table, watching as board members filed in. 12 faces, mostly older, mostly white, mostly people who'd built careers in an industry that had functioned just fine for them. They took their seats with the careful politeness of people approaching an unpredictable situation. James Whitmore, 68, lead independent director, opened the discussion. Marcus, we want to start by acknowledging everything you've accomplished in the last 6 months. The industry changes, the scholarship fund, the positive press. Skybridge has become synonymous with ethical leadership. Marcus heard the but coming before Whitmore spoke it. But we're also seeing financial impacts. The retraining programs cost $47 million last quarter. The independent complaint system added another $12 million in overhead. We've lost some of our highest value customers, people who don't like the elimination of lifetime status. And we're facing lawsuits from terminated employees claiming wrongful dismissal. How's our stock price? Marcus's tone was neutral, curious. Catherine, sitting to his right, pulled up the chart on the screen. 6 months of data showing initial volatility after the incident. A sharp dip in the first week, then a steady climb that had taken the stock to 12% above its pre-incident value. We're up. Marcus gestured at the screen. Despite the costs, despite the reforms, despite losing customers who felt entitled to treat our employees poorly, our stock is up. Why do you think that is? Board member Patricia Chen, 55, venture capitalist with a reputation for ruthless efficiency, leaned forward. Short-term sentiment. Investors rewarding the PR win. It's not sustainable. It's sustainable because we fixed a liability that was always there but never showed up on balance sheets. Marcus pulled up his own presentation, data Catherine's team had compiled over months. Before the incident, we were settling discrimination complaints quietly, paying out settlements that never made headlines but cost us millions annually. We were losing customers who'd had bad experiences but couldn't prove systematic bias. We were exposed to class action lawsuits that would have made our current costs look like rounding errors. The system wasn't cheap, it was just expensive in ways we didn't measure. The board members studied the data, seeing their company's hidden costs laid bare. Whitmore's expression hadn't changed, but something in his posture had shifted. Even if that's true, we're now spending visibly, publicly. Shareholders notice that. Shareholders also notice that our employee satisfaction scores are the highest in the industry, that our customer complaint resolution times have improved by 40%, that we're attracting top talent because we're the airline people want to work for. Marcus stood, walking to the window overlooking the city. We can build a company that extracts value from the loyalty of people who leave the moment a competitor offers them a better deal. Or we can build a company that creates value by being worth loyalty. I prefer the second. The vote, when it came, was unanimous to continue the reforms. Not because every board member believed in Marcus's vision, but because arguing against it publicly would be suicide in the current climate. Marcus accepted their support knowing it was conditional, knowing that real change required constant pressure, constant vigilance, constant willingness to spend political capital on principles that couldn't be compromised. 2 years after the incident at JFK, Marcus boarded a Skybridge flight from Chicago to Los Angeles. He'd deliberately chosen this flight, this route, this timing. Same day of the week as the original incident, similar departure time, same type of aircraft. He wore jeans and a sweater, carried the same worn leather bag, looked exactly as he had that morning in New York. The check-in agent, a young black woman named Kenya who'd been hired in the post-reform recruiting wave, processed his ticket with professional efficiency. No extra verification, no suspicious glances, just the standard questions and a warm smile. "You're all set, Mr. Bennett. Boarding starts in 30 minutes. The gate area was crowded, business travelers mixing with families, the usual chaos of American air travel. Marcus found a seat near the window, pulled out his phone, checked messages while people flowed around him. Nobody stared. Nobody questioned. He was just another passenger, which was exactly the point. Boarding began. Marcus joined the priority lane, his diamond status earned through actual flight frequency, not the entitlement structure he'd eliminated. The gate agent scanning passes was white, mid-50s, someone who'd survived the reforms by adapting to them. She smiled at Marcus with genuine warmth. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Bennett. Enjoy your flight." Marcus walked down the jetway, remembering another jetway, another walk toward confrontation. This time felt different. Not because of who he was, but because of what the system had become. The changes he'd forced into existence meant the next person who looked like him, who dressed like him, who didn't match someone's assumptions about who belonged in first class, would face less doubt, less scrutiny, less danger. The first-class cabin held a mix of passengers, demographics more diverse than they would have been 2 years ago. Marcus took his seat, 3A this time, not 1A. That particular seat held a teenager, 17 maybe, black kid in a university sweatshirt with headphones around his neck, studying what looked like calculus homework. The kid glanced up as Marcus settled in, gave a brief nod of acknowledgement, then returned to his work with the unself-conscious confidence of someone who'd never been told he didn't belong. Marcus felt something settle in his chest watching that easy comfort. Not pride exactly, more like vindication. The system still wasn't perfect, probably never would be, but it was better, measurably, documentably better. And that improvement was written in the posture of a teenager who could study calculus in first class without fearing that his presence would be questioned. An older white passenger, maybe 65, businessman type, took the seat across the aisle. He looked at the teenager, at the textbook, at the first-class cabin. For a moment, Marcus tensed, old instincts activating, preparing for confrontation. But the man just smiled, gestured at the math. "That's advanced stuff. You in university?" The teenager looked up, slightly wary but not defensive. "High school, a P calculus. Got a scholarship interview at Stanford next week." "Good for you. Work hard, you'll do great." The man settled into his seat, pulled out his own laptop, and the interaction ended with simple human acknowledgement instead of suspicion. Marcus relaxed, understanding what he was witnessing. Not the absence of bias, which would be naive to expect, but the presence of systems that no longer amplified bias into institutional violence. The businessmen might have had assumptions about who belonged in first class, but those assumptions hadn't been validated by crew training, by captain authority, by security violence. They'd just been assumptions held privately, unable to marshal power to enforce themselves. The flight attendant working first class was Monica Reeves, still employed, still professional, but different now. She'd been through the retraining, had watched colleagues lose careers, had learned that complicity carried costs. She greeted every passenger with the same careful respect, making no assumptions about who'd ordered champagne versus water, who'd need help with luggage versus who'd manage independently. When she reached Marcus, recognition flickered in her eyes. She'd been there that day, had watched his removal, hadn't intervened. The guilt of that memory was visible in the way her professional smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mr. Bennett, it's good to see you. Can I get you anything before departure?" Marcus saw the question behind the question. "Are we okay? Have you forgiven? Do you still see me as complicit?" He thought about easy absolution, about letting her off the hook with false reassurance. Instead, he chose truth. "Water, please. And Monica, what happened wasn't your fault alone, but it was partially your fault. You can't fix the past. You can only do better going forward." Monica's composure cracked just slightly, tears threatening before she controlled them. I am trying to do better. Every day. That's all any of us can do." The flight took off smooth and easy, climbing above Chicago's sprawl into clear autumn sky. Marcus looked out the window at the city shrinking below. at the infrastructure that connected millions of people, at the systems that could work for everyone if the people running them chose to make them. His phone buzzed with a message from Catherine. The FAA had just announced new regulations requiring all commercial airlines to publish demographic data on passenger complaints, removals, and enforcement actions. Another ripple, another consequence of that morning at JFK. Another small piece of accountability built into systems that had functioned too long without it. Marcus typed a response. Good. Keep pushing. The teenager across the aisle had dozed off, calculus textbook open on his lap, headphones now in place. Marcus watched him sleep with the unconscious ease of someone who felt safe, who trusted that the people around him would let him rest without questioning his right to the space he occupied. That trust hadn't existed 2 years ago. Not for kids who looked like him, who dressed like him, who didn't match the assumptions coded into 1,000 small decisions about who got extra scrutiny and who got waved through. The fact that it existed now, imperfectly but measurably, was worth every dollar spent on reform, every terminated employee, every uncomfortable conversation about bias and power. Marcus's own eyes grew heavy, exhaustion from constant travel catching up with him. He let himself drift, secure in the knowledge that if he woke to turbulence, to emergency, to any of the countless small crises that could happen at 35,000 feet, the crew would respond based on training and protocol, not on assumptions about who deserved care and who deserved suspicion. When he woke, Los Angeles was visible below, sprawling toward mountains in the afternoon light. The teenager was awake again, packing his textbook, looking excited and nervous in the way people did before important interviews. Marcus caught his eye. Stanford, you said? The kid nodded. Full scholarship if I get it. First in my family to go to college. You'll get it. And when you do, remember that you earned it. Not because someone gave you a chance, but because you did the work and the system finally got out of your way long enough to let you show it. The teenager smiled, uncertain how to respond to advice from a stranger who seemed to understand more than he was saying. The plane touched down, smooth landing, and passengers began the ritual of gathering belongings, checking phones, preparing to return to lives that had continued without them. Marcus waited until most of the cabin had cleared. Monica appeared again, her professional mask in place, but something more genuine underneath. Mr. Bennett, I wanted to thank you. Marcus stood, stretching legs that had gone stiff during the flight. For what? For not letting it go. For making us better. It was hard losing colleagues, going through retraining, having to examine things I'd done without thinking. But it was necessary. And I'm better at my job now because I understand what my job actually is. To serve everyone equally, not to make assumptions about who deserves service. Marcus nodded, accepting the thanks without minimizing the pain that had produced the growth. Growth was supposed to hurt. That was how people knew it was real. Keep doing the work, Monica. That's the only thanks I need. He walked off the aircraft into the Los Angeles terminal, anonymous again. Just another passenger completing another flight. His car was waiting outside. The driver a professional who knew better than to make small talk unless Marcus initiated it. The drive to his hotel took 40 minutes through traffic that never seemed to ease no matter what time of day. His phone showed messages accumulating, legal updates on remaining litigation, PR requests for interviews about the 2-year anniversary of the incident, board materials for next week's meeting, the ordinary machinery of running a company that had become extraordinary through being forced to confront its failures. But one message stood out, from Jasmine, now Dr. Jasmine Torres, pediatric resident at a hospital in Boston. Dr. Bennett, you'll always be Dr. Honorary to me. Wanted you to know I just finished my first solo surgery. 7-year-old girl, emergency appendectomy, successful outcome. I thought about what you said on the plane that day, about belonging anywhere I have the courage to go. I had the courage today. Thank you for helping me find it. Marcus read the message twice, feeling the weight of impact that extended beyond reforms and regulations into individual lives transformed. He'd boarded a plane 2 years ago intending only to reach Geneva for a business meeting. He'd ended up in a holding room with blood on his face and a choice about who he was going to be. The reforms would outlast him. The scholarship fund would educate doctors who'd treat patients he'd never meet. The regulations would protect travelers who'd never know his name. That extension of impact beyond his individual existence was the point of power. Not to elevate yourself, but to lift the floor for everyone who came after. Marcus typed a response to Jasmine. The courage was always yours. I just made sure nobody could take the seat you'd earned. Congratulations, Dr. Torres. Save lives, change systems, make me proud. The hotel room was empty, anonymous, the kind of space designed for temporary occupation by people passing through. Marcus stood at the window looking out at Los Angeles spreading toward the horizon, at the lights beginning to appear as sunset approached, at the evidence of millions of lives being lived in parallel, most of them never intersecting with his. But some did intersect. Some lives were changed by choices he'd made, by power he'd wielded, by refusing to accept that the way things were was the way things had to be. That intersection was responsibility, not just to the people he'd helped directly, but to everyone who'd come after, everyone who'd benefit from systems that had been forced to become slightly less unjust. His father's voice echoed across decades, advice given in a moment of crisis that had shaped everything that followed. Stay calm, document everything. Let them show you who they are, then decide who you're going to be. Marcus had stayed calm even with blood on his face, had documented everything through cameras he'd known would be present, had let them show him exactly who they were, from Vanessa's entitled fury to Thornton's casual authoritarianism to Brennan's violent compliance with unjust orders. Then he'd decided who he was going to be. Not the victim who accepted injustice to avoid making waves, not the executive who handled everything quietly to protect corporate interests, but the person who used power to create accountability, who broke systems that needed breaking, who understood that real change required making people uncomfortable enough to examine assumptions they'd never questioned. The phone rang. Catherine, checking in before tomorrow's meetings. Marcus answered, hearing her voice outline schedules and strategies and the ongoing work of running an airline that had become a case study in systematic reform. He listened, asked questions, approved decisions, played his role in the machinery of change. When the call ended, silence filled the hotel room. Marcus sat in that silence, feeling the accumulated weight of 2 years of consequence, of litigation and reform in the slow, grinding work of changing culture. He was tired, not the temporary fatigue that sleep could fix, but the deeper exhaustion that came from constant vigilance, from understanding that the moment he stopped pushing, the system would try to slide back toward equilibrium that favored convenience over justice. But tired didn't mean done. Tired meant the work mattered, that it cost something real, that it wasn't just performance but actual effort toward actual change. Marcus had earned this exhaustion through choosing difficulty over ease at every juncture. He'd earn it again tomorrow and the day after, and every day until the systems he'd reformed became self-sustaining, rather than dependent on his individual will. The city lights multiplied as darkness settled. Los Angeles transforming into a constellation of human activity, each light representing lives being lived, choices being made, small moments when people decided whether to examine their assumptions or simply act on them. Marcus thought about all the small moments happening in that sprawl. Gate agents deciding whether to question tickets. Captains deciding whether to trust crew judgment or verify facts. Security officers deciding whether force was necessary or pride. Thousands of small decisions that could either amplify bias into institutional violence or interrupt that amplification with questions, doubt, and the uncomfortable work of self-examination. His reforms couldn't control all those decisions, but they could change the costs of bad ones, could make assumptions expensive enough that people thought twice before acting on them, could shift the equilibrium from protecting comfort toward requiring fairness. That shift was incremental, imperfect, fragile. It required constant maintenance, constant vigilance, constant willingness to spend political capital on principles that couldn't be compromised. But it was real, measurable, worth defending. Marcus closed the curtains, shutting out the city, preparing for sleep that would be interrupted by dreams of jetways and handcuffs and the moment when everything changed. He'd learned to live with those dreams, to accept them as the cost of choosing confrontation over acceptance. Tomorrow he'd wake up and continue the work, but tonight he let himself feel something close to satisfaction. Not because the fight was over, but because it had started. Because systems that had functioned through discrimination for decades were being forced to function differently. Because the next person who didn't match someone's assumptions about who belonged would face a system that questioned those assumptions instead of validating them. That was victory. Not perfect, not complete, but real. And in a world that bent constantly toward convenience over justice, real was enough to keep fighting for. The lights went out. The city continued its work beyond the walls, and Marcus Bennett, who'd boarded a plane 2 years ago expecting nothing more dramatic than a business meeting, slept the complicated sleep of someone who'd used power exactly as it should be used, to make the world slightly less cruel for people who came after.